Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the concept of truth. What it is, what it isn't, and why it matters. Now you might think, why do we need to do a whole video on truth? If something corresponds with reality, it's true, and if it doesn't, it's false, right? It turns out it's more complicated than that. A lot more complicated. And the concept of truth is something I have written and rewritten script after script, trying to figure out what my thoughts are. So now would be a great time to remind you that I am not a philosopher, I'm just a random guy on the internet who thinks too much. And so you should take everything you hear in this video with the internet's grain of salt. So let's start with that concept of truth we've already outlined. Truth is statements which correspond with reality, and statements which do not correspond with reality are false. Right away, we have something to deconstruct, because this implies that truth is about beliefs and words. So there's an implicit assumption in there that the words that we speak have definite, set meanings. But that's just not how language works. History shows us that language evolves. Medieval English is different from modern English, and British English is different from American English. And the same is true for every other language. There are different languages, different dialects, different offshoots of different languages. It's an evolutionary tree. So words do not mean the same thing over time, and they don't mean the same thing from place to place. And if you spend a lot of time with different people, or, arguing with people on the internet, you probably know that different people have different meanings in their heads for the same words, even in the same culture, or the same family, or the same peer group. The meaning of language is not set in stone. It's fuzzy. There's overlap between our individual understandings of words and concepts, or else communication would be impossible. But the specific meanings of every word and every concept differ from person to person. So if you make a statement in a vacuum, like Benny is a cat, that statement may be true or may be false depending on who is hearing it, who is saying it, when they are receiving it, and what they are thinking about when they hear it. This proves that statements on their own are not true or false. We need more information to judge whether they're true or false. We need a context. So truth cannot be, as we defined it initially, as just a statement that corresponds with reality. It must at least be a statement plus a context that correspond with reality. For example, the holy city is Jerusalem is true if you're Jewish, false if you're Muslim, and nonsense if you're atheist. And even statements in science are true in some contexts and false in others, like gravity is a force. It's true if you're building a rocket, but it's false if you're modeling black holes. So let's say you want to persuade someone of something. You have two ways to go about it. One, you could work within their contextual framework to try to persuade them of the statement, or two, you could try to persuade them to change their contextual framework. For example, if you want to persuade an atheist that Jerusalem is the holy city, you could try to convince them that it is the holy city according to atheism, or you could try to convince them to become Jewish. So now we see truth as a pairing of statement and context that corresponds with reality. But what about this idea of capital T truth? We often hear religions and ideologies claiming to know the capital T truth. And we also hear about truth seekers who eschew conventional ideologies, seeking capital T truth on their own. It's a belief that there is something beyond us, some statement, some kind of truth that is absolute, that remains true no matter what. It is true for everyone across all time. So if this concept makes sense, then it can't simply be a pairing of statement and context. Because with statement-context pairs, there are many things that seem contradictory that can all be true at the same time. In order for capital T truth to make sense, there has to be some kind of objective standard by which statement-context pairs can be measured against. And here's the thing. Simply having a self-consistent contextual framework does not mean that that is the standard for capital T truth. If you come up with a religion that explains everything, that does not mean it is capital T truth. If you come up with a scientific theory of everything by which you can explain the entire cosmos and everything that happens within it, that is not sufficient to count as an objective standard for measuring capital T truth. And here's why. There are multiple contextual frameworks that are self-consistent and can explain everything. And in order for capital T truth to exist, the standard has to be the only one, and it has to be sufficient to prove itself. So, what could possibly fit the requirements of there being only one and its existence is sufficient to prove itself? There is an answer: reality. Which naturally leads to the question, what is reality? Again, the answer is not so simple. We did a whole video on it and did not come to a conclusion at the end. My view on reality is something we talked about in this video on consciousness called representational realism. The idea that reality is not a concept, therefore every concept, every philosophy, every belief we have is an interpretation. It's a representation of reality. It is not reality itself. Reality is not made of concepts. It is not made of words. Reality is simply made of reality. So, how can that help us? Why is reality important? What does it do? Regardless of the ontology of reality, reality is what determines cause and effect. When we speak, when we communicate ideas, we're not acting in the realm of reality. Words and their meanings are not reality. Actions are reality. So the truth of a context statement pairing is how reliably it lets us create intended consequences from our actions without harmful side effects. What really matters is not speaking truthfully or believing truthfully, but acting truthfully. Constructing general theories is only useful inasmuch as it helps us to act effectively in each unique moment. Capital T truth is not some overarching dogma that explains everything possible and guides us in how to act in every conceivable situation, but recognizing the link between the actions we take and the consequences that follow. We should never let our beliefs get in the way of reading the situation before us and acting in accordance with what's really happening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.